Many years ago, I took a spare room deal with a coworker because my lease was ending, my savings were thin, and I needed a place fast. I worked mornings at a print shop, came home early, and planned to keep my head down, stack money, and move out in 6 months. He seemed normal in the boring way. Paid on time, cleaned dishes, talked about fresh starts. I even vouched for him when the landlord asked for a reference, because I'm an idiot and I wanted the room. The first weird thing wasn't a scream or a bruise. It was mail. Envelopes with different names, but our address. He'd snatched them off the counter like they were on fire. I told him to stop using my place like a dumping ground. He smiled and said the post office messed up. At first, it was 2 or 3 pieces a week. Then it became a daily stack, like someone aimed a hose at our mailbox. Credit offers, bank letters, cheap phones, and glossy ads. Final notice stuff that was too official to be a scam. I started writing return to sender and circling not at this address like it was my second job. He'd wait until I went to shower, then he'd peel the labels off and throw the envelopes into his backpack. One afternoon, I came home early and caught him at the kitchen table with a razor blade, slicing open envelopes clean and quick. No gloves, no shaking hands. He'd slide the blade under the flap, pull out the paper, read it, then press the seam back down like he could undo time. I snapped, asked what the fuck he was doing. He didn't even blink. He said, fixing mistakes. I told him to stop. He smiled like I made a cute joke and said I worried too much. I told him he was using our address for shit that wasn't ours. He shrugged and said, it's temporary. I said, so is my patience. He finally got annoyed, not loud, just colder. He reminded me I needed this place, like he was doing me a favor. Then a woman showed up in the hallway, not angry at first, just tight. She asked for him by a name I didn't recognize. I said nobody lived here by that name. She stared at me like I'd rehearsed it. She left without a scene, but she touched the door frame on the way out like she was marking it. I went inside and found him sitting on the couch with the TV off, shoes still on. I told him a woman was looking for that name. He didn't ask what she wanted. He said flat, if she comes back, you didn't see me. I said I wasn't his shield. He looked at me like that word bored him. He said, don't make this complicated. 2 nights later, I heard her again in the hallway, this time with a man. I watched through the peephole because I'm not brave, I'm just curious in the worst way. She pointed at our door. The man leaned in and checked the number like he was confirming a drop. Before they left, she dragged her fingertips over the doorframe again, slow, and it hit me that she wasn't marking it for herself. She was leaving a note for someone else. After that, I started seeing little paper cuts of evidence everywhere. A storage unit key on his ring that didn't match anything in our building. A cheap burner phone he kept charging behind the microwave. A stack of blank forms in his room, clipped and sorted like a filing system. I didn't snoop at first. I just noticed. Then I found something that made it personal. My manager called me into the back at the shop and held up a rental application. Our copier watermark sat in the corner, faint but there. The footer had my employee code and a timestamp. He asked me why my code was on a form for an apartment across town. Attached was my coworker's photo and a current landlord section listing our address. The contact number wasn't my landlord. It was mine. I lied out of reflex. I said someone must have used my login. My manager didn't buy it. He told me if this turned into fraud, he'd hand over everything. He said it like he was doing me a kindness. I went home with that paper folded in my pocket like it was a knife. I knocked on my coworker's door and didn't wait. His room looked like a cheap office. A little printer on a folding table. Scissors, glue stick, stacks of envelopes, a trash bag full of torn up paper strips. He didn't flinch when I came in. I shoved the application at him and asked how the hell he got my employee code. He stared at it for 2 seconds and said, "You leave your computer open." I told him I didn't. He said, "Then you should start paying attention." That pissed me off so hard my ears rang. I told him he was done. I told him he couldn't use me, my job, my address, my name. He didn't yell. He went calm, like I'd asked about the weather. He said I should mind my business because People who mind other people's business end up with problems. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a policy. I tried to go to my landlord with it. The landlord got defensive immediately, like I was insulting his judgment. He reminded me, loudly, that I had vouched for the guy. He said if I was making trouble, he'd keep my deposit and report me for harassment. I stood in that guy's office and felt my face burn. I told him I wasn't harassing anyone. I was warning him. He leaned back and smirked like I was some dramatic tenant trying to get special treatment. He said the roommate hadn't missed rent. He said the building was quiet. He said if I wanted to break the lease, I'd pay the fee. I told him I didn't have the fee. He said, then stop stirring shit. I walked out shaking. I got home from the landlord's office and found him in the kitchen washing one plate that was already clean. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just said, "You look stressed," like he'd been waiting for me to come back empty-handed. I told him the landlord wasn't helping and I was done with his bullshit. He kept scrubbing the same spot and said, "Landlords hate drama." I told him I wasn't drama, I was cornered. He finally turned, wiped his hands, and gave me that neat smile. He said, "You don't want to make enemies in a building with thin walls." I told him to stop talking like a fucking pamphlet. He stepped closer, not fast, just certain, and said, "Then act normal." After that, he got weirdly polite. He'd take out my trash. He'd restock paper towels. He'd wipe the counter after I cooked like he was auditioning to be the perfect roommate. But he also started leaving my mail on my bed instead of the counter, like he'd been in my room and wanted me to feel it. Once I came home and my closet door stood half open. Nothing was missing. That almost made it worse. It felt like a hand on the back of my neck. I started carrying my passport and birth certificate in my backpack to work because I couldn't stand the idea of him scanning them while I slept. So I did the dumbest thing. I looked him up. Not Google. Court records. Eviction filings. Old restraining orders. Different counties, different names, same birth date. Same height. Same dumb. Clean smile and one grainy mugshot. The pattern wasn't bad luck. It was a method. I sat at the public library, so I didn't do it on my own Wi-Fi. I typed in every name that came through our mailbox, then the name the woman used. Each one hit something. Evictions where the notes mentioned unauthorized occupants. Small claims over property damage. A restraining order that described identity theft and threats, dismissed because they couldn't serve him. He kept slipping out of the paperwork the same way he slipped out of the mail, like paper couldn't hold him. I went home and the apartment felt smaller. I started locking my bedroom door even when I took a shower. I kept my wallet in my pocket inside my own place like a paranoid idiot. Little things moved anyway. My keys would shift an inch. My laundry basket would end up in the center of my floor like someone wanted me to notice they could touch my stuff. Once I found the bathroom mirror wiped clean through the steam, a single handprint size streak, like someone checked their face in the dark. That night, I found my own name on one of the fake letters. My signature scanned at the bottom. My stomach flipped so hard I almost threw up. He'd dragged me into it without asking. He'd turned me into a shield. It was a landlord verification form with my name typed in ugly default font, my phone number printed like it belonged, and my signature pasted from an old invoice at work. It said he'd lived with me for 2 years. It said I recommended him without reservation. I stared at it and realized he didn't just want my address. He wanted my credibility. He wanted someone normal to stand in front of him when everything caught fire. I walked to his door and stopped with my fist raised. Inside, his printer fed another page. Click, work, click. He wasn't scared. He was working. I backed away, packed a bag with shaking hands, and sat on my bed until the sky turned gray. I kept thinking about that woman's fingers on the doorframe, like she was leaving a breadcrumb trail to my front door. I packed a bag and left before sunrise. I didn't slam the door. I didn't want him hearing anything. 2 weeks later, a detective called asking why my number was on a lease connected to a missing person case. And the worst part is I couldn't even say, honestly, I had no idea, because I did. I saw it. I just hesitated long enough for it to spread. Every Sunday, I drove to my sister's apartment because she begged me to check on our brother while she worked doubles. I wasn't a caregiver, I wasn't trained, I was just the oldest and the one who answered calls. My plan was to bring groceries, make sure he took meds, and keep the peace long enough for her to breathe. He wasn't violent at first. He just started rewriting reality out loud. He'd swear the neighbors were filming him through outlets. He'd unplug lamps and stack them by the door like barricades. He'd accuse my sister of selling him out because she asked him to shower. I argued with him, which was pointless. I kept thinking if I sounded firm enough, he'd snap back to normal, like normal was a button I could press. He argued back with a calmness that felt wrong, like he'd already won in his head and I was just late to the meeting. He'd stand in the middle of the living room and point at empty air, describing people in detail, who stood there, what they wore, what they whispered. I'd stare at the blank wall until my eyes hurt, waiting for my brain to catch up to his. Nothing was there. The nothingness was what made me sick because it meant I couldn't fight it. You can't punch empty space. The apartment started changing around him. Towels shoved under the front door. Tape over the peephole. Aluminum foil wrapped around his phone. Every outlet had something jammed into it, tissue, cardboard, whatever, like he could clog the world. He stopped opening the blinds. He stopped bathing. When I brought groceries, he'd inspect the bags like they were suspicious. If a can was dented, he'd set it aside and refuse to eat it. He'd make me leave my keys on the counter so I couldn't do anything. If I laughed, even a little, he'd go stiff and watch me like I'd slipped up. Then the system stepped in the way it always does. Late and stupid. The landlord filed noise complaints. The cops showed up and treated him like a criminal. I wasn't there for the first visit, but I walked in after and saw the scrape marks on the floor and the way his wrist was red like someone had grabbed him hard. He told me they searched his place for devices and laughed at him. The landlord slid a warning under the door with a threat of eviction like that was going to fix a brain that was on fire. A clinician visited once, asked fast questions, and left with a pamphlet. I watched her eyes skip over the taped outlets and the blocked peephole and the way he couldn't sit still. She asked if he was a danger to himself or others. He smiled and said no. She nodded like her job was done. I wanted to grab her by the sleeve and say, "Listen to how he says it. Listen to how easy it is for him to lie." But I didn't. I stood there like a coward because I didn't want to make it worse. One night my sister called crying because our brother had covered the peephole with tape and refused to let her in. She screamed his name through the door. He screamed back that she wasn't her. He drove over. I pounded on the door until my knuckles hurt. He cracked it open an inch, eyes bright and flat, and asked me why I was wearing a wire. I felt my face go hot. I wanted to slap him. I wanted to hug him. I did neither. I shoved my foot into the gap because I didn't trust what he'd do if he shut it, and I forced my way in while my sister sobbed in the hallway like she'd been locked out of her own life. Inside, it smelled like rotten food and sweat and something chemical, cleaner. Maybe he poured too aggressively to erase something. The air burned my nose. There were plates with crusted leftovers stacked in the sink like a tower. He'd scratched lines into the drywall. Not art, not words, just tally marks like he'd been counting days in a cage. I stared at those marks and my stomach dropped. He wasn't just scared. He was trapped somewhere I couldn't reach. I tried to get him admitted. I called the hospital, then drove him there once, then called again when he refused to get out of the car. Every time it came back to the same question, was he a clear danger? I said he wasn't threatening anyone. That was true. It was also the trap. They told me to monitor him, like I had a spare life for that. They told me to bring him in if he got worse, like worse was going to announce itself politely. I went back to work with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My sister worked doubles and then came home to a locked door and taped peephole and a brother who stared through her like she was a stranger. 2 weeks later, my sister found a stack of printed maps on his bed. Routes between her job and home. Routes between my job and home. Notes about times. Notes about when lights turned off. He had written our schedules like he was planning a burglary. He called them escape routes. The pages looked like stalking because that's what stalking looks like when you print it out and lay it in a neat pile. My sister texted me photos and I felt my throat close up. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the realization that he could move. He could act. I confronted him. I didn't do it gently. I slapped the maps on the table and demanded an answer. He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He said he needed to know where we were because they would use us to reach him. He said if he couldn't protect us, he'd have to remove the weak links. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He said it like math. That sentence hit me so hard it cleared my head like cold water. I stopped thinking about his feelings. I started thinking about what a man can do in 10 seconds when his brain tells him it's the right thing. I left before I said something unforgivable. In the car, I called my sister and told her exactly what he said. She swung between thanking me and calling me dramatic, and then crying so hard she could barely breathe. She loved him. She hated what he was doing to her. She hated me for being the one to say out loud what we'd been avoiding. I signed the paperwork that got him held. My sister thanked me, then hated me, then thanked me again. The facility called it stabilization. He called it kidnapping. I called it survival. When they came for him, he stood in the doorway like he'd been waiting. He looked at me and smiled in this small, nasty way, like I'd finally shown my true face. He went without throwing punches, which almost made it worse because it meant he was choosing it. As they led him down the stairs, he kept his eyes on me like a promise. Afterward, my sister and I went back into the apartment with trash bags and gloves. We ripped tape off the peephole. We pulled towels from under doors. We threw out food that had liquefied in the fridge. We found more notes. Not just maps, lists of license plates, times cars parked outside, little tests he'd run on the neighbors. My sister started shaking, and then she got mean, snapping at me over stupid shit like where I put the trash bag, because anger was the only thing keeping her upright. I snapped back. We fought in that filthy kitchen like it mattered, like we weren't both drowning. At one point she told me I didn't have to live there, so I didn't get to judge. I told her she didn't get to pretend this wasn't dangerous. We both shut up after, breathing hard, because we both knew we were right. And then the part that still fucks me up happened. The week after he was admitted, my sister's job went quiet. No more anonymous complaints about her attitude. No more weird calls asking if she was okay. No more surprise wellness checks at her door. For months, she'd been getting yanked into the office over petty reports that didn't make sense. For months, she'd had strangers act like they were watching her, like they knew her schedule. We'd chalked it up to stress and bad luck, and his paranoia bleeding into our brains. But stopped too cleanly, too abruptly, like someone got bored the second our brother got locked away. The twist that still fucks me up is this. After he was admitted, my sister stopped getting harassed at work. The anonymous complaints stopped. The weird wellness checks stopped, like someone had been using his spiral as cover the whole time. And once he was locked away, the game ended. I still don't know if he was imagining enemies or if he was the easiest person in the world to push until he broke. About a year ago, I took a side gig editing short videos for creators because my main job paid like shit and I needed extra money. I worked from my laptop, posted some clips under my name, and planned to keep it small. No drama, no audience, no weird parasocial crap. I kept my head down, sent invoices, rendered exports at 2 a.m., and tried not to think about how thin my life felt. Then someone made an account with my face as the profile picture in my exact bio, except the tone was off. Like me, but meaner. Like they'd read my stuff and decided I deserved to be a worse version of myself. They started demanding people I actually knew. Not random fans. People who could hurt me by believing it. They posted screenshots of my messages where I sounded unstable and horny and desperate. I don't even talk like that. I read it and felt my skin crawl because it was close enough to stick. Close enough that people didn't pause. They just reacted. I got texts with that careful pity tone. One friend sent me a screenshot and didn't even ask first. They just wrote, "Dude, what is this?" I typed back so fast I misspelled my own denial. I kept saying it wasn't me, and it didn't matter because the messages looked like they could be me, and that was the whole trick. At first, I tried to report it. Platforms don't move fast when you're nobody. I filled out the forms, attached my ID, refreshed the ticket, watched the account keep posting like it had a permit. I blocked it. It still showed up in other people's feeds. I asked mutuals to report it, and some of them hesitated, like they weren't sure which me was real. That hesitation lit something ugly in me. I messaged the account directly once just to see if a human was there. The response came back instantly, a photo of my apartment door from the hallway. No words, just the door. Same scuff on the bottom, same peepholes down the corridor, same cheap overhead light that makes everyone look gray. I stood there with my phone in my hand, staring at a picture of my own front door, and I couldn't make my brain accept it. I looked through my peephole. Empty hallway. No footsteps. No elevator din. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you you're the only one breathing. After that, it turned into real-life harassment dressed up as normal errands. A delivery showed up with a huge bag of dog food. I don't own a dog. The guy read my name off the label and acted like I was lying to get free stuff. He dumped it by my feet and walked away before I could shove back at him. I dragged it inside because leaving in the hall makes you the asshole neighbor, and it sat there stinking up my place like proof I couldn't control my own address. A week later, a wellness check. 2 cops at my door asking if I planned to hurt myself because a concerned friend called. I could feel my neighbors watching through peepholes, like my panic was tonight's entertainment. The cops did that soft, fake calm voice. They asked if I had weapons. They asked if I'd been sending alarming messages. I said no. I said someone was impersonating me. I said it's online, look, and one of them leaned past me like he expected to see a body in my living room. I kept my hands visible and my voice flat because I knew what a raised voice buys you in that moment. More suspicion, more questions, more time with 2 strangers in your doorway. When they left, I heard a lock click across the hall. Somebody had been listening the whole time. My shame hit like nausea. Then my boss got an email from me confessing I'd been stealing client data. HR pulled me into a room and acted kind while they asked sharp questions. They printed the email and slid it across the table like it was evidence. It had my name, my signature block, my job title, and just enough internal details to sound real. HR asked how I got access. I said it's my fucking job. HR asked why I'd admit it. I said I didn't. My boss wouldn't look at me. I could feel the room trying to decide what kind of person I was. I swore because I couldn't help it, and the second the word left my mouth, I saw HR's face tighten like there it is. That tiny shift made me want to flip the table. Instead, I forced myself to breathe, and I pulled up the fake account right there on my phone. Thumbs shaking, and I showed them the posts, the DMs, the screenshots. HR stared like it was a weird animal. My boss finally spoke and asked if I'd made any enemies. That pissed me off more than anything. Like this was my fault for being visible at all. I left with my job still technically intact, but everything got colder after that. People replied slower. People stopped joking with me. My boss stopped putting me on anything sensitive. I became the guy you keep at arm's length because nobody wants to get splashed by someone else's mess. I changed passwords. I added 2-factor. I locked down everything. I logged out of devices, audited apps, froze my credit, called my bank, did all the responsible shit you're supposed to do when you're being hunted by a ghost in a hoodie. And it kept happening because the impersonator didn't need my accounts. They used my name like a costume, and people believed the costume. The worst part was the stuff they didn't post publicly. They emailed my landlord claiming I had bed bugs. The landlord scheduled an inspection with barely any notice. I called the office, and the property manager sounded annoyed, like I was trying to dodge a dirty secret. I told her it wasn't true. I told her someone was messing with me. She said they still had to inspect for the building. The next day, they showed up with a pest guy and a clipboard, and I stood there while a stranger walked through my bedroom, taking photos for documentation. He lifted my mattress, opened drawers, shined a flashlight into seams like I was contaminated. I wanted to punch the wall. I just clenched my jaw and let it happen, because resisting makes you look guilty. When they found nothing, Nobody apologized. They just left with pictures of my room in their phones because somebody typed my name into an email. After that, I deleted my social presence. I went quiet. I thought starving it would kill it. I wiped posts, untagged photos, set everything private, stopped using my real name on creator work. I told clients I was rebranding because saying someone is wearing my face makes you sound insane. I stopped going out much. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I checked behind me in reflective windows like an idiot. I tried to make myself unfindable. 2 weeks later, I walked into a small local meetup a friend begged me to attend. No online sign-up, no public listing. I fought them about it first. Not cute, not playful. Angry. I told them I didn't want to be seen. They told me I was turning into a paranoid asshole. I told them they didn't get to judge something they weren't living. We said shit we couldn't take back, and I went anyway because I didn't want to lose the last person still treating me like I existed outside the problem. The meetup was in a back room of a coffee shop. Folding chairs, name tags, awkward small talk. I tried to blend. Then a guy I'd never seen before turned his head like he'd been waiting. He smiled like he knew me, like he'd practiced it. He didn't approach. He just watched, calm as a fucking statue. The whole time. No participation, no phone out, no hey, just steady eyes tracking me every time I moved. My friend noticed and asked what my problem was, and I hissed at them to drop it. That started another argument, low and mean, right there among strangers, and I hated myself for it. When it ended, I left fast. I didn't see the guy follow. That should have been relief. It wasn't. It meant he could move without me noticing. When I got to my car, I saw something white under the wiper and my stomach went tight like a fist. When I left, I found a sticky note tucked under my wiper. Good job staying offline. No signature, no threat, just proof that distance didn't matter anymore. This happened when I was apprenticing at a locksmith shop because I wanted a trade and I was tired of living paycheck to paycheck. I cut keys, rekeyed cylinders, and rode with my boss on small jobs. My plan that week was to finish a certification module, prove I wasn't useless, and stop getting treated like the shop's errand dog. The shop treated apprentice like a polite word for errand bitch. I swept brass, hauled busted deadbolts, got blamed when customers misread their own keys. I kept telling myself if I ate enough shit, one day I'd be the guy who didn't have to. We got a call from an apartment complex for an emergency lockout. The request came through the property manager's email, looked legit, had unit number and authorization. My boss was sick, so he told me to handle it and don't fuck it up. No coaching, no second set of eyes. He shoved the work order at me, pointed at the van, and went back to coughing like I was already gone. I showed up with my tool bag, and my clipboard like that made me official. The property manager wasn't there. Office door locked, blinds down, nobody in sight. That should have been my hard stop. Instead, I stood there trying to talk myself out of looking weak, like leaving would prove I couldn't handle a simple call. A guy in a polo shirt met me by the stairs. He said the manager was in a meeting and had sent him. He had a keyring with building keys and a badge that looked right at a glance. He didn't look sketchy. That's what still pisses me off. He looked like any maintenance guy you'd ignore in a hallway. He acted annoyed, like I was delaying his day. I asked for ID. He flashed a card fast, like magicians do. I leaned in and he pulled it back, lips tight. When I asked again, he went right at my ego, locksmith's power trip. Apprentices think they're cops. He'd email corporate and get our shop blacklisted. He kept talking over me, so I couldn't pin him down with a clean question. My heart kicked up because I was new, I was alone, and I couldn't afford my boss getting a complaint. He didn't threaten me with a fist. He threatened me with paperwork and humiliation, which is honestly smarter. He walked up the stairs, and I followed, because he made it feel like the job was already decided. Halfway up, I tried to slow it down. No manager on site. No tenant present. Why are we drilling? He snapped that the master wasn't working and the resident was out. He shook his keys like proof, but he didn't even try them. He just stared at my bag until I unzipped it. He He said, "Do your job," like it was a command and an insult at the same time. Unit 3C sat at the end of the hall. The place smelled like old carpet and fryer grease. He positioned himself right behind my shoulder, close enough that I could feel him, but not close enough to look aggressive. I told him I needed authorization on paper. He waved the email printout in my face like it was scripture and said, "Do you want our boss to hear about this or not?" I hate that line. I hate how fast it worked on me. So I did the job. I drilled the lock clean, swapped the core, handed him the new keys. No screaming, no breaking door, no drama. Just quiet compliance. The drill chattered, metal warmed under my fingers, and the cylinder gave up. The deadbolt turned and the door cracked open, then stopped on a chain. That should have ended it. That should have snapped me awake. I said, "Chains on," and he didn't even blink. He slid something thin into the gap and popped it off from the inside in one quick motion, like he'd practiced on that exact door. The air from the apartment hit me, colder than the hallway, with a sharp chemical smell that made my eyes sting. I didn't step in. I stayed in the hall like I'd been trained. Still, I saw enough to feel wrong later. A shoe on its side near the couch like someone stepped out of it mid-step. A TV on with the sound muted. A mug on the counter with brown sludge ringed at the bottom. Normal stuff, but abandoned in a way that made my stomach clench. He took the keys from my hand like we'd just finished a normal service call. He smiled, small, private, and shut the door. My new lock clicked. That sound followed me down the stairs. Back at the shop, I dropped the invoice on the counter and tried to act calm. My boss barely looked up. He grunted like I'd done the bare minimum, then snapped at me for leaving shavings in the van floor. I swallowed it because I still thought the day was normal and I was still chasing approval like a dumb dog. 2 hours later, the real property manager called the shop screaming that Unit 3C had been hit and the tenant was missing. Police were on site. They wanted to know who gave access. My boss went dead quiet, then turned on me so hard it felt like getting punched. He called me a fucking idiot, loud enough for a customer at the counter to hear. He said he never told me to do anything without a manager present, which was a lie, but he said it anyway because fear makes people lie fast. I tried to say he'd sent me, that the email looked legit, that the guy had a badge, and my boss just kept repeating, "You drilled it? You drilled it?" like I confessed to arson. I drove back to the complex on my own, shaking so hard I clipped the curb. The door to 3C was shut, new lock shining. My lock. Police tape hung loose like someone had already peeled it. A cop stopped me with his arm before I got too close, and I blurted out who I was and what I'd done because hiding it felt worse than confessing. People stared from cracked doors. One neighbor muttered, "That's him," like I'd shown up to finish it. A detective asked me to describe the guy in the polo. I tried, and my memory got slippery because I'd only half looked at him. That's the cruelty of it. He didn't need a mask. He needed my impatience and my fear of getting in trouble. I gave him what I had: buzzed hair, average face, badge clip, keys, the way he stood too calm for an emergency, the thin tool he used on the chain. The detective didn't comfort me. He just wrote and stared at my hands like they were part of the crime scene. They pulled camera footage. The stairwell camera malfunctioned at the exact time. The only clear shot was me, walking up with my bag, doing the work, leaving. I looked like the person who made it possible. Because I was. The detective asked why I didn't call the office, why I didn't verify the ID, why I drilled a deadbolt without a tenant present. Each question landed like a slap. My answers sounded pathetic even to me. He rushed me. He threatened to complain. I didn't want to mess up. None of that matters when someone's missing. I gave a full statement. I asked for a lineup. I offered to come in to do anything. The detective told me, flat, that I should get a lawyer. Not because I was helpful, because I was liability. He said it like advice, not kindness, and it made my knees go loose. I walked out into the parking lot and threw up behind my car, dry and bitter. The shop fired me the next day. My boss didn't do it gently. He shoved my last check at me and told me never to come back. He said I'd ruined him. He didn't mention the missing tenant once. He cared about the shop's name on the side of the van and the bills on his desk. When I tried to explain the badge, the keys, the threats, he called me a sucker and said, "Congratulations, you helped a predator." That word, helped, stuck to me like grease. My family told me to move on, like you can move on from building a door for someone else's nightmare. They said, "You didn't hurt anyone," and then they got irritated when I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying the click of the lock. They wanted me quiet because my guilt made them uncomfortable. When I finally snapped and said, "I drilled it for him," my mom said, "Stop saying it like that, like wording was the problem." A week later, I got a letter from the complex's attorneys claiming damages. My name spelled correctly, my address correct. They wanted to pin it on the easiest target, the apprentice with no money and no power. I read on my kitchen floor because my legs wouldn't hold me up. It talked about negligence like it was a math problem. It didn't say a word about the person who disappeared. I scraped together money for a consult, and the lawyer didn't pat my head. He told me to stop talking to anyone without counsel, to save every text, to write down every detail before my brain tried to soften it. He said, you didn't kidnap anybody. And then he said, "But you did open the door." I went home and dug through my phone like an addict, staring at the work order, the email chain, trying to find some magic detail that would erase what I did. All I found was how easy it was to spoof a situation and how eager I was to believe it. The missing tenant never got found, at least not in any public way. I kept checking updates like an idiot, waiting for someone to call and say they'd caught the guy and it wasn't on me anymore. Nothing came, just silence and that shiny lock in my head, the chain popping, the little smile, the click. And I still hear the drill sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, not as a sound, but as a feeling in my hands, because that day taught me the worst kind of horror is how normal it feels to participate. Me and my cousin worked a tow yard because nobody else in our town hired fast, and we needed rent money. I ran dispatch of the window, took calls, logged plates, and planned to keep my head down because tow work gets you screamed at for other people's mistakes. The office was a trailer bolted to a gravel lot, and the lot was where good moods went to die. People came in spitting, banging the counter, calling me a thief because they couldn't accept the tow is just a bill with a chain on it. My cousin loved it. He'd grin and talk down to them, like the anger fed him. I hated that part of him, and I still clocked him beside him because I needed the paycheck and I didn't have the luxury of morals that cost rent. A woman came in looking for her sister's car. She had a photo of it, the plate number, the usual panic. She wasn't rude. She was shaking, mascara streaked, phone in her hand like it might light up with a miracle. I ran the plate. Nothing. I checked pending intake, impound, overflow, even the sloppy handwritten notes the drivers left when they were too lazy to type. Nothing. I told her we didn't have it. My cousin snorted and said people always lie. The woman started crying, and my cousin rolled his eyes like crying was a scam. I told him to shut the fuck up and do his job. He told me I was soft, and that soft people don't last here. The woman kept wiping her face with her sleeve and asking me to check again. So I checked again because she looked like she'd fold in half if I didn't. Still nothing. She said her sister texted she was stuck, then the phone died. She said her sister had a kid and never just disappears. My cousin muttered that none of that was our problem, and she should have called the cops instead of wasting our time. She stared at him like she wanted to spit in his face, then she looked back at me like I was the last person in town who might still be human. She left without yelling, just walking out like her legs didn't trust the ground. Later that night, I found a paper tag on the floor behind the counter, stuck to a boot print. It was one of our intake tags, the cheap ones we stick on windshields. It had the missing sister's plate on it, written in our yard's shorthand. That meant the car had been processed here. Someone had logged it and then removed it from the official record. My stomach dropped so hard I grabbed the counter to stay standing. I ran the plate again, slow and careful, like the computer would confess if I asked politely. Nothing. I dug through the trash, the clipboard pile, the printer bin, the drawer where we keep misprinted releases. No duplicate tag, no recipe, no intact cheque. Just the tag in my hand and it felt like holding proof I wasn't supposed to have. I asked my cousin. He got sharp and told me to shut up. He said the owner had arrangements, and I didn't want to be the one asking questions. He called me a stupid bitch for even bringing it up. I told him to stop calling me that and answer me. He stepped close enough I could smell smoke on his hoodie and said I didn't understand how the town worked, and if I kept poking my nose into shit, I'd get it cut off. He said certain cars went off book, and that was how he stayed paid. I told him a person might be missing. He said people go missing every day, and I was acting like a hero for a stranger. I almost hit him. I just clenched my fists and swallowed it because the room had cameras and I needed my job. After he stomped out to smoke, I pulled up the security feed. The camera over the intake lane glitched right during the hour that plate should have arrived. The only thing left was one still image. Car entering, time-stamped, then nothing. Like someone cut the tape with a blade. Every other camera ran clean. Just the one that mattered went blind at the perfect moment. I replayed it until my eyes hurt, watching the timestamp jump like it skipped a heartbeat. I zoomed in until the pixels turned to mush, and still the plate was clear as day. I printed the still and shoved it in my pocket. I kept the tag behind my ID like it was contraband. The next day, I carried that paper like it was going to burn through my jeans. My cousin and I fought like we weren't even family. He told me to drop it. I told him he was a coward. He told me I was going to get us both evicted with my hero bullshit. I told him I'd rather sleep in my car than help people disappear. He shoved my shoulder. I shoved him back. His fist twitched up like he wanted to swing. Then he glanced at the camera and laughed, like the camera was the real boss in the room. That afternoon, a guy in a clean jacket came to the window asking for a release. Not his car, not his name, just a release. He didn't look like our usual customers. No confusión. He looked comfortable, like he'd ordered this before. He slid a cash envelope under the glass and smiled like we were co-workers. I didn't touch it. I pushed it back and said no. He didn't argue. He just watched me, calm as a priest, like he was memorizing what I looked like when I tried to do the right thing. My cousin stepped in and took the envelope anyway, quick and casual, like it was his paycheck. The guy gave a tiny nod and walked out like the air belonged to him. I dragged my cousin into the back and went off on him. He hissed at me that I was going to get us both killed over some random chick. That's what snapped something in me. How easy he said it, like getting killed was an acceptable risk for making extra cash. I asked who that guy was. He said it didn't matter. I said it mattered if we were laundering a missing person through our gate. He told me to shut my mouth and remember where my rent money came from. I called him a piece of shit. He told me I'd regret being loud. The rest of that shift, drivers kept coming and yelling about fees, and I could barely type because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, my tires got slashed in my driveway. Not all four, just enough to make me stranded and pissed. 2 deep cuts, clean like someone with a steady hand knelt down and took their time. I stood there with my phone flashlight shaking in my hand, and all I could think was, they know where I live. I called my cousin, and for once he answered, and all he said was, "I told you." Then he hung up. The next morning, I found a dead animal on my porch, arranged carefully like a message from someone who had time. Not tossed, placed. I gagged, took photos anyway, then shoved it off the porch with a shovel and double bag it like that could make it less personal. I drove to the station on the spare and asked for a detective. I handed him the still image and the paper tag. I told him about the camera gap, the cash envelope, my cousin's warning, the tires, the porch. He listened, nodded, and asked who owned the tow yard. I told him. His face changed like I'd said a family name that carried weight. Not surprise, recognition. Like a door closing. He asked if I had copies. I didn't. He said he'd look into it, and his tone made it sound like looking into it was the same as putting it in a drawer and praying it disappeared. I tried calling a detective the next day to make sure he logged it. Straight to voicemail. I left a message, then another. No call back. At the yard, the vibe shifted like somebody flipped a switch. Drivers who used to joke with me stopped. One of the lot guys stared at my pocket like he knew exactly what I had shown the police. My cousin cornered me by the vending machine and told me, dead-eyed, that if I kept dragging outsiders into it, I was going to make it worse for everyone. I told him I already did, and he said, "Good, now shut up and live." When I walked out, a cruiser was parked across the street, engine running, and the officer inside stared straight through me like I was a bug on glass. Maybe it was nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. 2 days later, someone filed a complaint that I'd been stealing from the register. The owner investigated and fired me on the spot. I showed up for my shift and my code didn't work. The owner called me into his office and spoke soft, like he was putting down a dog. He said numbers didn't add up. He said he couldn't trust me. I told him it was bullshit and he knew it. He smiled and said proof wasn't required for employment decisions, then told me to hand over my keys and leave the property. I walked out with my face burning and my stomach hollow. My cousin wouldn't meet my eyes. I called him after. No answer. I texted. Nothing. He didn't block me. Silence was the point. And the woman who came looking for her sister never came back, never called, like somebody told her it was useless. I kept waiting for a flyer, a news story, a rumor, anything. The town just kept going, gas station lights buzzing, school buses running, people joking in line at the grocery store like nobody was missing. I didn't solve anything. I just learned what kind of town I lived in. The kind where a missing person becomes paperwork, and paperwork gets fixed by people who all know each other. So last winter, I agreed to house sit for a client's bulldog because I needed quick cash and my roommate was driving me insane. I was a part-time dog walker, I knew the building, and my plan was to stay 3 nights, keep the dog fed, and binge trash TV in somebody else's warm apartment. My roommate had turned our place into a daily fight over stupid shit. Dishes, noise, random people coming in, him forgetting his half of everything and then acting like I was the problem for noticing. I wanted out. I took the job like it was a rope thrown to someone drowning. The client's building was one of those glossy new places with a front desk and cameras everywhere. The kind of lobby that tries to shame you into being quiet. I've been there a lot with other dogs. I knew the elevator, the hallway smell, the way the doors close soft like they don't want to be heard. Day one was clean. I fed Winston. I walked him. I wiped his drool because bulldogs leak like broken faucets. I texted the client a photo of him sitting like he owned the couch. I locked the deadbolt like the note on the counter said. I went to bed early because I finally could. The dog snored like a lawnmower. I slept hard. The second morning I woke up and the living room felt edited. Not trashed, not robbed, just wrong in a way that made my skin tighten. The throw blanket was folded tighter than I left it. The remote sat perfectly parallel with the coffee table edge. The dog's water bowl had been turned like somebody cared about the angle. The coasters were stacked. I stood there staring like an idiot, trying to rewind my own actions. I blamed myself. I told myself I did it half asleep and forgot. I told myself I was being dramatic because my life already had enough chaos and my brain was hunting for more. Winston didn't help. He looked at me, panting calm, like the room always looked like that. I checked the front door. Chain on. Deadbolt turned. Latch set. No scratches. No prime marks, nothing. I still felt like somebody had put their hands on the place while I was unconscious, like they were tidying up to show they could. I didn't want to sound insane, so I didn't tell the client. I just sent a normal text update like everything was fine. That day I got obsessive. I started placing things on purpose, crooked on purpose, like I was setting traps for reality. I left the blanket bunched and half off the couch. I put the remote on the cushion at an angle. I rotated the water bowl toward the wall. I even snapped a quick photo because I wanted proof for myself more than anybody else. Then I walked Winston, came back, and did the lock routine again. I turned the deadbolt until it stopped. I checked it. I checked it again. I remember my hand on that metal like it was burned into me. That night, I heard the front door handle test once. Not a full jiggle, just a soft click, like someone touching it to confirm a detail. My whole body went hot and cold at the same time. Winston didn't bark. He lifted his head and stared at the door with this flat, resigned look like this was a known annoyance. That's what made it worse. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera, not because it was smart, but because it was something to do with my shaking hands. I stood behind the kitchen counter because it gave me a sliver of cover without making me feel like a complete coward. The handle tested again. Then the lock didn't fight. It turned smooth, like whoever was out there had a key and the deadbolt wasn't thrown. I know I locked it. I know I did. I've been practically performing it like a ritual. The sound wasn't a break. It wasn't a struggle. It was a simple turn like butter. The door opened an inch. A shadow slid into the gap. I didn't see a weapon. I saw patience. They didn't rush. They didn't whisper. They just stood there and let the air change, like they wanted me to feel them inside my space. Winston stayed quiet, just sat up straighter, breathing hard through his nose. I backed up fast and grabbed his collar. My brain didn't pick a heroic option. It picked the bathroom. I pulled him down the hall, slammed the bathroom door, flipped the lock, and dragged the dog in with me. The tile was cold under my feet. My phone almost fell out of my hand because I couldn't stop shaking. I called a client. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I called building security and immediately started talking too fast, like my words could hold the door shut. The guy on the line hit me with that dead, lazy tone. He asked what unit. He asked my name. He asked if I'd invited someone over. That question snapped something in me. I started swearing at him because I couldn't make my hands work and I needed him to feel the urgency. No, I didn't invite anyone, you fucking idiot. Someone just opened the door. Send someone up. He repeated the question like he didn't hear me, like he wanted me to say something that made this my fault. I pressed my ear to the bathroom door. I expected footsteps. I expected drawers opening, cabinets slamming, anything. Instead, I got silence. Not the normal apartment silence either. It felt intentional, like someone was standing still on purpose, so I'd imagine them closer. My stomach kept flipping. Winston panted so hard his whole body moved, but he didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't do a single brave thing. He leaned into my legs, heavy and shaking. That made me angry at him for half a second, then guilty, then angrier at myself for being mad at a dog. I called the client again and again until my thumb hurt. I texted her that someone was in the apartment. No response. I heard a soft sound outside the door, maybe a shoe on hardwood, maybe the shift of a coat, maybe my own blood pounding. I held my breath until my lungs burned. The security guy told me to stay calm, like calm was a fucking switch. I told him I was going to call the police. He said he was sending someone, and then nothing happened for minutes that felt like a whole hour. When the security guard finally banged on the apartment door, I came out of the bathroom with my phone up like a weapon and Winston pressed to my side. The apartment was perfect again. No intruder, no broken lock, no open drawers, no missing items. My crooked little proof set up from earlier? Gone. The remote sat aligned. The blanket was folded. The water bowl was rotated like it had been set by someone with rules. It looked like a staged photo of a calm, expensive life. Winston panted like he'd run a mile, eyes wide, like he wanted to crawl back into the bathroom. The guard did a quick walkthrough with a flashlight like he was checking a hotel room for smoke. He glanced at the lock, turned the knob, shrugged. He asked what happened. I explained, fast and ugly, because the story sounded insane even while it was happening. He kept looking at me instead of looking for the person I said was in there. He asked if I was sure about the deadbolt. I said yes. He gave me this tight, annoyed look like I was wasting his night. He checked the balcony, checked a closet, opened a cabinet, then stood there like, see, nothing. He didn't ask about the dog's behavior. He didn't ask about keys. He didn't ask if anyone else had access. He acted like the only mystery was why I was panicking. I argued with him. I got louder. I pointed at the lock and told him it turned without resistance. He told me, basically, that locks don't do that unless you don't lock them. That made me want to put my fist through something. I didn't. I just stood there shaking while he wrote me off with his eyes. The next day, management emailed the client saying I had caused a disturbance and compromised building safety. That line made my jaw clench so hard it hurt. Like I was the threat. Like I was the one trying doors. The client got furious at me, not the building, because that's the easiest direction for anger to go. She called and went straight into blaming me. She said security reported no evidence. She said the lock system showed normal use. She said I made her look bad. I told her, sharp, that someone had opened her door and she should be asking who had keys, not yelling at the dog walker. She snapped that I was being dramatic, that I must have messed up the lock, that I panicked for attention. That last part hit like a slap. I started arguing back, swearing, because I could feel myself getting shoved into the liar box and I couldn't tolerate it. I told her dog didn't bark, that he stared at the door like he'd seen it before. There was this brief pause, like I'd stepped on something sensitive, and then she doubled down and got meaner. She said I was done, that she'd handle it, and I should leave immediately. Fine. Ich packet fast. I didn't clean. I didn't fold anything. I didn't care anymore about the stupid apartment looking perfect, because perfect was the whole fucking problem. Winston followed me like a shadow, snorting, nails clicking, glancing at the door like it might open again on its own. In the elevator, I kept checking my reflection because my face looked wrong, pale and sweaty, like I'd been sick. In the lobby, the front desk person smiled at me like everything was normal, like I hadn't just spent a night listening to a stranger breathe in someone else's home. I wanted to scream at them to check the key list, check the staff, check whoever belongs there. I didn't. I left, and I kept replaying one detail, the lock turning like butter. Whoever did it didn't break in. They belonged there on paper. That's what made me feel sick. The danger wasn't a stranger. It was someone who already had the door.